In cybersecurity, risk is generally defined as the potential for harm or loss resulting from the vulnerabilities, threats, and impacts associated with information systems or assets. It represents the likelihood that a specific threat will exploit a vulnerability and the potential consequences or damages that may arise from such an event. And there are four outcomes when it comes to dealing with risk. You can mitigate the risk by putting factors to try to reduce the risk. Multi-factor authentication is an example of this. You can accept the risk, and this is the option for when you cannot change anything and none of the other outcomes are usable. You can remediate the risk, and you could do this by upgrading an out-of-date system, for example, or turning off services that are internet facing that are not required. And you can also transfer risk using an insurance company. By assessing the likelihood and impact of potential risk, organisations can prioritise their security efforts, implement appropriate safeguards, and make informed decisions regarding risk mitigation strategies, such as risk acceptance, risk avoidance, risk transfer, or risk mitigation. NIST 837 is a special publication by the National Institute of Standards and Technology that provides risk management framework. The framework outlines a structured approach to managing risks associated with information systems, and the NIST 837 controls consist of 6 key steps. Categorize, which involves identifying the information system and determining its security category based on factors like impact level and potential threats. Select. Once the system's category is determined and appropriate security controls are selected, the NIST 853 control catalogue is used to mitigate identified risks. Implement. The selected controls are then implemented within the information system to ensure proper deployment and functionality. Assess. The implemented controls are then evaluated to determine the effectiveness in managing risks and meeting security objectives. Authorized. Based on the assessment, a risk determination is made and the system is authorized to operate if the residual risks are within acceptable limits. And monitor. Ongoing monitoring and continuous assessment of the security controls are conducted, which ensures the effectiveness and addresses any changes to the system's risk profile. The NIST 837 controls provide a systematic approach to managing information systems risks and enhancing cybersecurity resilience. By following the framework, organisations can better protect their critical assets, respond to emerging threats, and comply with applicable regulations. With the assessment process, NIST provide another document, the NIST 830, and this provides guidance on how to conduct risk assessments for information systems. In a nutshell, the NIST 830 helps organisations identify and evaluate potential risks to their information systems. It outlines a systematic process for assessing risks, starting with establishing the risk assessment scope, identifying assets and threats, assessing vulnerabilities, estimating the likelihood and impact of risks, and determining risk levels. The publication emphasises the importance both technical and non-technical factors in the risk assessment process, and it provides methodologies and techniques for conducting risk assessments, including quantitative and qualitative approaches. By following NIST 830, organisations can gain valuable insights into their information system risks, make informed decisions about risk mitigation strategies, and enhance their overall cybersecurity posture. The NIST 830 is a traditional approach to risk management, but some organisations are looking for a more modern approach. And a modern approach is simply asking the question, what are the threats I'm worried about? And ransomware is the biggest right now. So the questions are, how does it happen? And what are the controls that address these concerns? Businesses love asking, what are we doing for ransomware? Are we secure? It's therefore great to use the modern approach for things like ransomware and business email compromise, because you'll get lots of questions from the top board about these areas. A key point to come away from this unit about risk assessments is that transferring risk should not be seen as a complete solution. Insurance is not a replacement for controls. So now moving on to the next unit about threat modelling. And threat modelling is a systematic approach to identifying and mitigating potential threats to a system or application. It involves analysing the system design, architecture and components to proactively identify potential vulnerabilities and assess the associated risks. It helps organisations understand the potential threats they may face and develop appropriate countermeasures. Now, 3 models of doing this are STRIDE, which is spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. You've also got DREAD, which is damage potential, reproducibility, exploitability, affected users and discoverability, but this model is not widely used anymore and it's seen as abandoned. And then you also have OCTAVE, operationally critical threat, asset and vulnerability evaluation. And by engaging in threat modelling, organisations can proactively identify and address potential security weaknesses before they can be exploited. It enables stakeholders to make informed decisions, allocate resources effectively, and strengthen the overall security posture of their systems and applications. A risk report from audit results is a subjective summary document that's trying to be as objective as possible, and it outlines the findings of an audit or assessment conducted within the organisation. It presents a comprehensive analysis of the identified risks and their potential impact on systems, data and operations. And the report provides detailed information about vulnerabilities, weaknesses and non-compliance issues that were discovered as part of the audit process. It highlights the areas of concern such as inadequate security controls, potential gaps in processes or vulnerabilities that could be exploited by threat actors. Each identified risk is described in terms of its likelihood and potential impact, with a score that is obtained by multiplying the likelihood and impact score together. It's imperative that consistency is used within this scoring, and you can score on a level of 0 to 10 or 0 to 100, but it's got to remain consistent for the future audits and risk assessments. The risk report will usually include recommendations and mitigation strategies to address the identified risks effectively, and these recommendations serve as actionable steps for improving the security posture and essentially reducing the likelihood of incidents. Now, this here is my completed risk assessment report from the risk assessment that I completed for the case study. I will leave this within the files on Teams for you to have a look through if you wanted to have a look in more detail. But once you've completed with the risk assessment, you will order the risks in the order of severity, and that enables you to write a report like this one that I've done here on the findings. Now, what you do is you look at all of the risks and think about them at a company level. The report can help you with your defendable opinion about choosing your likelihood and impact scoring levels, because management will likely challenge the findings that you get. Now, remember, the scoring can be subjective, but it does need to be as objective as possible, and the report should contain information about the actual threats with a description of the vulnerabilities found. It should detail the mitigating factors or compensatory controls in place, and if you're in a position to suggest one, you can detail it here as well. This report should also give reasoning to the scores of your likelihood and impact scoring, as well as an explanation of the risk found. And the risk report acts as a valuable tool for decision making, and it enables organisations to understand and manage the risks more effectively. It helps to allocate resources, prioritise risk mitigation efforts, and enhance the overall security and compliance. So now moving on to the governance unit of this course. And governance is the attitude of the leadership of the organisation. Now, the G is the most important aspect of GRC. It underpins everything we do from an information security viewpoint. The policy communicates the clear message and expectations. The standard contains the defined quantitative values outlining the detail of the policy. The standard allows you to give context to a policy, and a procedure details how the policy will be implemented. It's like the instruction manual, but it doesn't need to be hyper specific. As an example, there could be a password change policy. The standard would be to have the password changed every 90 days, and the procedure could be how the end user changes their password, with a password change prompt at the 90-day mark perhaps. Visual recordings of completing the action would also be a more modern approach to procedures as opposed to just written documents. And guidelines provide essential recommendations and best practices, but these are guidelines. They don't need to be followed strictly like policies, standards and procedures would. When it comes to policy creation, there are two ways to do this. You've got the traditional and the modern. Traditionally, an organisation will create lots of policies that map to different sectors. As above, the NIST security control identifiers and family names show the typical policies an organisation will create, but maintenance with lots of different policies can be time consuming, and it leads to some policies just simply not getting refreshed or renewed. A more modern approach is to create an information security policy with subsections for each of the areas all contained within the one document. Whenever any part of the document is reviewed or new sections of the policy are added in, this policy is then technically reviewed, keeping it fresh and active. But the policy length does need to be under review and ensure it's not too large. And you also have the acceptable use policy separate from the information security policy. So, like I said in the previous slide, a smaller organisation may have just the one information security policy, and it incorporates all of the above in just the one policy. An information security policy should contain the purpose, scope, the actual policy, sanctions or penalties for failing to comply, as well as a sign-off from management showing acknowledgement and approval for support. Without approval from management, the policy is a paperweight. Sometimes the policy will also contain a revision section detailing changes to the policy since the previous version. So here are the key points then for this last unit. A policy needs to be easy to understand and enforceable. A policy should detail what to do and stay away from what not to do. A policy should not be long, it should be tight and concise to enable easy following. A large document is not going to be read fully by your staff. The policies and procedures should be actively followed. An auditor will ask to be shown how the policy is being followed, and they will want evidence, for example. It's important that policy and standards will actually work for the organisation. It's a waste of everyone's time to create a policy and standard that's not actually achievable within the organisation. And lastly, governance is not tangible. It's the tone at the top of how management shapes what is acceptable behaviour within the organisation. The last unit of the Masterclass concluded with several hints and tips on how to secure that GRC analyst role. This included focusing on your branding and how you can come across, as well as the massive importance of professional networking and using social media to your advantage. Discord servers and professionals on LinkedIn give great ways for newcomers to be able to create the connections to those that are already in the field and getting your name out there. The course also included some hints and tips on how to polish your own LinkedIn page, and a few of those adjustments I've taken on board recently, including changing my photo and including an emoji in my name field to try and fight those bot messages. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for watching. If there's any questions, please fire away and I'll answer them for you. Thank you.